On Christmas Eve, I found my daughter shivering outside in 28-degree weather while her husband's family toasted champagne by the warm fireplace. What I did next changed everything forever. If you're watching this video, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story reaches because every mother needs to hear this. I stepped out of my car into the bitter Chicago cold. My breath formed clouds in the freezing air as I pulled my coat tighter around me. After driving 8 hours straight from Milwaukee, my body ached, but my heart raced with excitement. I was about to surprise Sarah for Christmas. My little girl, now 28, had no idea her mom was coming to visit. The neighborhood looked picture perfect. Every house glowed with warm Christmas lights. Inflatable Santas dotted the front yards. The smell of wood smoke drifted from chimneys. I could hear Christmas music playing from different houses, creating a cheerful soundtrack to the snowy evening. Sarah's house sat at the end of Maple Street, a two-story colonial with a wraparound porch. Through the large front windows, I could see the Christmas tree twinkling in the living room. Golden light spilled out onto the snow-covered lawn. It looked like something from a Christmas card. I grabbed the bag of presents from my back seat and walked up the shoveled driveway. My boots crunched on the salt scattered across the concrete. I was grinning like a kid, imagining Sarah's face when she opened the door. She always loved surprises, even as a little girl. But as I got closer to the house, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Laughter. Loud, mocking laughter coming from inside. Through the window, I could see Sarah's in-laws gathered around the dining room table. Her husband Mark sat at the head, raising a wine glass. His parents, the Richardsons, were there too, along with his sister Jessica and her kids. They were having a feast. The table overflowed with food. A golden turkey, bowls of stuffing, cranberry sauce, rolls, and mashed potatoes. Wine bottles lined the center of the table. Everyone was dressed up, smiling, celebrating. But where was Sarah? I walked around to the side of the house, looking through more windows. The living room was empty except for the Christmas tree. The kitchen showed signs of cooking, but no people. Confused, I headed toward the front door to knock. That's when I saw her. Huddled on the porch swing in the far corner, almost hidden in the shadows, sat my daughter. She wore nothing but a thin sweater and jeans. No coat. No gloves. No hat. Her arms were wrapped around herself, and her whole body was shaking. "Sarah?" I called out, dropping the bag of presents and running to her. She looked up at me with hollow eyes. Her lips were blue from the cold. Her hair was messy and damp from the snow that had started falling. When she saw me, tears began streaming down her face. "Mom?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What are you doing here?" I immediately took off my heavy winter coat and wrapped it around her. Her body was ice cold, like she'd been sitting out there for hours. I pulled her close to me, feeling how thin she'd gotten since I last saw her 6 months ago. "Oh, sweetheart, how long have you been out here?" I asked, my heart breaking at the sight of her. "Since dinner started," she said quietly. "Mark said I was ruining Christmas with my attitude. He told me to sit outside until I could act normal." I looked through the window again at the warm, laughing family inside. Steam rose from the food. Wine flowed freely. Christmas music played, and they had left my daughter outside in freezing weather like she was nothing. "We're going inside right now," I said, helping her stand up. Her legs were so stiff from the cold that she could barely walk. "No, Mom. Please," Sarah grabbed my arm. "It'll just make things worse. Mark gets angry when I complain." But I was already walking toward the front door, supporting Sarah's shaking body. The rage building inside me felt like fire in my chest. These people had left my child outside to freeze while they enjoyed Christmas dinner. This wasn't going to stand. I rang the doorbell repeatedly, then started pounding on the door with my fists. The Christmas music inside stopped. I could hear voices, confused murmurs. The door opened and Mark's mother, Elano, appeared. She was dressed in an expensive red dress, her hair perfectly styled, holding a glass of wine. When she saw me supporting Sarah, her face showed annoyance rather than concern. "Well, this is a surprise," Eleanor said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "If we'd known you were coming, we would have set another place at the table." "Set another place?" I said, my voice shaking with anger. "My daughter has been sitting outside in the cold while you people feast inside." "What kind of family does that?" Eleanor sighed dramatically. "Sarah chose to sit outside. We invited her to join us when she was ready to stop being dramatic." Behind her, I could see Mark approaching with his wineglass, his face flushed from drinking. The rest of the family gathered behind him, all staring at us like we were interrupting their party. This was just the beginning. What happened next would change Sarah's life forever. And these people had no idea what they were about to face. Mark stepped up behind his mother, swaying slightly from the wine. His tie was loose, his shirt partially unbuttoned. He looked at Sarah, shivering in my arms, and rolled his eyes. "Here we go again," he said loudly enough for everyone inside to hear. "Sarah's playing the victim card." Mom tried to include her, but she wanted to pout instead. I helped Sarah through the doorway into the warm house. The heat hit my face like a wave. Christmas music played softly from speakers in the ceiling. The smell of turkey and cinnamon filled the air. Everything looked perfect and festive, which made the cruelty even worse. "Playing victim?" I said, my voice rising. "She was hypothermic out there. Look at her lips. Look how she's shaking." Sarah's father-in-law, Robert, stood up from the dining table. He was a tall man with silver hair, wearing a navy suit. He'd been a bank president for 30 years and carried himself like he owned every room he entered. "Now, let's all calm down," Robert said in his deep, authoritative voice. "This is Christmas Eve. We don't need drama." Drama? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "My daughter was freezing outside while you people celebrated inside. That's not drama. That's cruelty." Mark's sister Jessica laughed from the dining room. She was younger than Mark, maybe 25, with blonde hair and a mean streak I'd noticed at the wedding. Her two kids, ages 8 and 10, sat next to her, picking at their dessert. "Aunt Sarah always ruins holidays," Jessica said to her children, loud enough for everyone to hear. "She gets sad about her problems and makes everyone uncomfortable." Her kids giggled. "Why is Aunt Sarah always crying?" the younger one asked. I felt Sarah's body tense in my arms. Her breathing became shallow. I knew she was holding back tears, trying not to give them more ammunition. But I'd heard enough. I guided Sarah to the living room couch and wrapped a Christmas throw blanket around her. Then I turned to face this family who had shown such heartless behavior. "What problems?" I asked Jessica directly. "What exactly are Sarah's problems that justify leaving her outside to freeze?" The dining room went quiet. Eleanor took a long sip of wine. Robert adjusted his tie. Mark looked uncomfortable for the first time. Finally, Eleanor spoke up. "Well, since you're asking, Sarah has been difficult lately. She's been sad all the time. She won't participate in family activities. She barely speaks during dinner. And," I prompted. Jessica jumped in. "And she can't even do the one thing wives are supposed to do. She's been married for 3 years and still hasn't given us any grandchildren. What's the point of having a daughter-in-law who can't have kids?" My heart stopped. I looked at Sarah, who had buried her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. I knew about Sarah's fertility struggles. She'd called me crying after each failed attempt. 2 miscarriages in the past year alone. The doctor said her body was under too much stress, but I didn't know her in-laws were using her pain against her. She's been trying, I said quietly, my voice dangerous. She's lost 2 babies this year. She's grieving. Mark scoffed. Grieving? They were barely pregnancies. Just a few weeks each time. She acts like she lost actual children. The room spun around me. The cruelty of that statement hit me like a physical blow. I looked at Sarah, who was now sobbing openly into the blanket. Those were her babies, I said, my voice breaking. Each one was a life she was looking forward to. A child she wanted to love and raise. But they weren't real babies, Eleanor added matter-of-factly. It's not like losing a child who was actually born. Sarah is being overly emotional about natural biological processes. Robert nodded in agreement. Women in my generation understood these things better. They didn't make such a fuss over every little setback. I couldn't breathe. These people were not just cruel, they were monsters. They had taken my daughter's deepest pain and used it to justify treating her like garbage. So, because she lost her babies, you decided she deserved to freeze outside? I asked. We decided she needed to learn that marriage involves responsibilities, Mark said, crossing his arms. She can't just hide in her room being sad all the time. She has duties as a wife. What duties? I demanded. Cooking, cleaning, hosting family, Eleanor listed off. Being pleasant company. Supporting her husband's career. Making this house a home. She does all of that, I protested. Jessica laughed again. Barely. She burns half the meals she tries to cook. The house is always messy. And she's terrible at entertaining. Look at tonight. We're trying to have a nice Christmas dinner, and she brings the whole mood down with her sulking. She brings the mood down because you people are horrible to her. I shouted. We're horrible. Mark stepped closer to me, his face red with anger and whine. We've supported her through her failures. We've been patient with her depression. We've made excuses for her to our friends. But enough is enough. Failures? I repeated. The miscarriages, he said bluntly. Other women managed to stay pregnant. Sarah can't even do that right. Sarah let out a wail of pain from the couch. The sound tore through me like a knife. I turned to Mark with fury I didn't know I possessed. You think miscarriages are her fault? You think she chose to lose those babies? I think she's not trying hard enough, he said. I think she's too stressed and negative. Maybe if she had a better attitude, her body would cooperate. The room was deadly silent except for Sarah's crying. Even the Christmas music seemed to have stopped. Everyone stared at us, waiting to see what would happen next. I looked around at each face. Eleanor with her fake concern. Robert with his cold authority. Jessica with her mean smirk. Mark with his drunken arrogance. Even the children who were absorbing every cruel word as normal family behavior. This wasn't just neglect. This was systematic emotional abuse disguised as family expectations. They had convinced themselves that their cruelty was justified, that Sarah deserved their treatment because she couldn't give them the grandchildren they wanted. Get your coat, Sarah, I said quietly. We're leaving. She's not going anywhere, Mark said. This is her home. These are her responsibilities. I helped Sarah stand up, keeping the blanket wrapped around her. She was still shaking, though whether from cold or emotion, I couldn't tell. This was never her home, I said. A home doesn't leave family members outside to freeze. A home doesn't blame women for miscarriages. A home doesn't treat grief like a character flaw. I guided Sarah toward the door, but Mark blocked our path. "You don't get to come into my house and tell us how to live," he said, his breath smelling like wine. "Sarah is my wife. She stays here." I looked him directly in the eyes. After 30 years of teaching martial arts, I knew how to project strength even when my heart was breaking. "Move," I said simply. Something in my voice made him step aside. As we reached the door, Eleanor called out, "Sarah, if you leave tonight, don't expect to come back. We won't tolerate this disrespect." Sarah stopped walking. I felt her body tense with fear. "It's okay," I whispered to her. "You don't ever have to come back here." We walked out into the cold night air, leaving behind the warm house, the Christmas feast, and the family who had never deserved my daughter in the first place. But this was far from over. What they had done to Sarah was about to have consequences they never saw coming. I drove Sarah to my hotel room in silence. She sat in the passenger seat, wrapped in my coat, staring out the window at the Christmas lights blurring past. Her breathing had finally steadied, but I could see the pain in her eyes reflected in the glass. Once we got to the room, I helped her into the shower to warm up while I made hot tea. As the water ran, I sat on the bed and tried to piece together how things had gotten this bad. Sarah had always been my bright, happy girl. Even after her father left when she was 12, she kept her optimism. She believed in fairy tale endings, true love, and happy families. When she met Mark in college, she thought she'd found her prince. I remembered their wedding 3 years ago. Sarah glowed in her white dress, convinced she was starting the perfect life. Mark seemed decent enough then, though his family struck me as cold. But Sarah was so happy, and I wanted her dreams to come true. The first year seemed fine. Sarah would call me weekly, chatting about decorating their new house, learning to cook Mark's favorite meals, and planning for the future. She wanted children right away. She'd always been maternal, playing with dolls well into her teens, babysitting every kid in the neighborhood. But the calls started changing in year 2. Sarah's voice got quieter. She mentioned Mark working late more often. She talked about trying to please his parents, who visited frequently and had opinions about everything from her housekeeping to her cooking. "They're just particular," Sarah would say when I asked about tensions. "I'm still learning how they like things done." The first miscarriage happened 18 months ago. Sarah called me sobbing at 2 a.m. saying she'd lost the baby at 8 weeks. I drove to Chicago immediately, arriving to find Sarah devastated and Mark annoyed by the drama. "These things happen," he'd said when I asked how he was supporting her. "The doctor said it's normal. She needs to get over it and try again." But Sarah couldn't just get over it. She'd already bought baby clothes, chosen names, and planned the nursery. She grieved like any mother would, but Mark and his family treated her sadness like a character flaw. The second miscarriage came 6 months later. This time, Sarah barely called to tell me. Her voice was flat, emotionless. When I pressed her about how Mark was handling it, she just said, "He thinks I'm being too emotional again." I started noticing other changes during my visits. Sarah, who used to be proud of her appearance, looked tired and thin. The house was immaculate, but she seemed anxious about every detail, jumping up to fix things that looked perfectly fine to me. "Eleanor likes the magazines fanned a certain way," Sarah would explain, "or Robert expects dinner at exactly 6 p.m. I asked her why Mark's parents' preferences mattered so much in her own home. "It's their son's house too," she'd say. "I want them to feel welcome." But they weren't just feeling welcome. They were taking over. They had keys and would drop by unannounced. Eleanor would inspect Sarah's housework and make suggestions. Robert would comment on Sarah's appearance, telling her she looked tired or needed to smile more. Mark never defended his wife. If anything, he agreed with his parents' criticisms. Sarah was too emotional, too messy, too this, too that. She started believing it. I should have seen the signs earlier. Sarah's growing isolation. Her constant apologies. The way she flinched when Mark raised his voice. But she was good at hiding it, and I was 3 hours away, only seeing glimpses during visits. The breaking point should have been obvious in hindsight. Sarah had been trying to get pregnant again for months with no success. The stress was taking a physical toll. She'd lost weight, developed insomnia, and started having anxiety attacks. Mark's response was to pressure her more. He wanted children to show his parents he'd married successfully. When Sarah suggested they take a break from trying, maybe go to counseling together, he exploded. "Other women don't need therapy to have babies," he yelled. "Other women don't make everything so complicated." That's when Sarah started believing she was broken. That's when the depression really took hold. And that's when Mark and his family started treating her like a burden instead of a person. The final cruel twist was that Sarah blamed herself for their treatment. She thought if she could just be perfect enough, if she could just give them grandchildren, they would love her again. She didn't realize they'd never really loved her at all. As I sat in that hotel room listening to Sarah shower, I thought about all the warning signs I'd missed or minimized. The way she'd stopped talking about her dreams. How she never mentioned friends anymore. The forced brightness in her voice when she insisted everything was fine. I'd failed to protect my daughter from people who saw her as nothing more than a baby-making machine. When that machine broke, they discarded her without a second thought. But the worst part was how they'd convinced her it was her fault. Sarah believed she deserved their cruelty because she couldn't fulfill their expectations. She'd internalized their abuse so completely that she apologized for taking up space in her own home. When she came out of the shower, her skin was finally warm, but her eyes were still hollow. "I'm sorry, Mom," she said quietly as she sat on the bed next to me. "I'm sorry you had to see that. I'm sorry I've been such a disappointment." My heart broke all over again. "Sweetheart, you have nothing to apologize for. None of this is your fault." "But maybe they're right," she whispered. "Maybe I am too emotional. Maybe I do ruin things." "No," I said firmly, taking her hands in mine. "They're wrong about everything. You're not broken. You're not a failure. You're a woman who's been treated terribly by people who should have loved and supported you." Sarah started crying again, but these tears were different. They weren't the silent, ashamed tears she'd cried at the house. These were the tears of someone finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of what she'd endured. "I don't know how to leave," she admitted. "I don't have anywhere to go. I don't have any money of my own. Mark controls everything." That's when I realized the true scope of their abuse. It wasn't just emotional anymore. They'd isolated her financially, socially, and psychologically. She was trapped in a marriage that was slowly killing her spirit. "You're coming home with me," I said. "We'll figure out the rest later." "But what about my stuff? What about the house?" "Things can be replaced, Sarah. Your life and happiness can't." As we packed her few personal belongings the next morning while Mark was at work, I made myself a promise. These people had hurt my daughter for the last time. They thought they held all the power because of their money and social standing. They were about to learn how wrong they were. 3 days after Christmas, Mark showed up at my hotel room. I'd been expecting him. Sarah was taking a nap, finally getting the rest she desperately needed, when I heard the aggressive pounding on the door. "I know you're in there, Sarah." Mark's voice carried through the thin hotel walls. "Open this door right now." I checked through the peephole. Mark stood in the hallway, his face red with anger, still wearing his work clothes. His tie was crooked, his hair disheveled. He'd probably been drinking. I opened the door but kept the chain lock on. Lower your voice. This is a hotel. Where's my wife? He demanded, trying to push against the door. She doesn't get to just disappear without consequences. She's resting. Something she apparently couldn't do in your house. My house? Mark laughed bitterly. That's her house, too. She has responsibilities there. She can't just run away because she had her feelings hurt. I closed the door, unhooked the chain, and stepped into the hallway, pulling the door shut behind me. I didn't want Sarah to hear this conversation if she woke up. Feelings hurt? I kept my voice low but let the anger show. You left her outside to freeze, Mark. Your family spent dinner talking about her like she wasn't human. Mark straightened his tie and tried to compose himself. Look, maybe things got a little heated on Christmas Eve. Family gatherings can be stressful. But Sarah overreacted, like always. Overreacted to being treated like garbage in her own home? She wasn't being treated like garbage. She was being held accountable. There's a difference. I stared at this man who had promised to love and cherish my daughter. Up close, I could see the signs I'd missed before. The coldness in his eyes. The way he automatically blamed others for his own behavior. The complete lack of empathy. Accountable for what exactly? For being a wife, Mark said, as if it should be obvious. For keeping house, being pleasant company, supporting her family. For not wallowing in self-pity every time something doesn't go her way. You mean every time she loses a baby? Mark's jaw tightened. Those weren't babies. They were barely even pregnancies. Women lose pregnancies all the time without falling apart. The casual cruelty in his voice made my hand shake with rage. Those were her children, Mark. Your children. She mourned them because she loved them. She obsessed over them because she's unstable. My mother thinks Sarah needs professional help. Depression, anxiety, whatever you want to call it. She's not handling life like a normal person. And your solution was to punish her for being sad? Our solution was to stop enabling her victim mentality. My parents have seen this before with other women in the family. Sometimes you have to use tough love to snap them out of it. I felt sick to my stomach. Tough love? You isolated her from friends, controlled her money, criticized everything she did, and blamed her for medical conditions beyond her control. That's not love. That's abuse. Mark stepped closer, trying to intimidate me with his height and size. That's marriage. That's what commitment looks like when things get difficult. Sarah made vows. She doesn't get to break them just because life gets hard. What about your vows? For better or worse? In sickness and health? I kept my vows. I provided for her. I gave her a home, security, everything a woman needs. She's the one who couldn't hold up her end. Her end being what? Having babies on demand? Her end being a functioning adult. Mark's voice rose despite my warnings about the hotel. Other wives managed to keep their husbands happy, maintain their homes, and contribute to their families. Sarah just takes and complains and cries. A door opened down the hall. An elderly man in a bathrobe peered out, clearly annoyed by the noise. This conversation is over, I said, turning back toward my room. Mark grabbed my arm. No, it's not. You don't get to come into my family and destroy my marriage. Sarah is coming home with me tonight. I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up at his face. 30 years of martial arts training had taught me to read people's intentions through their body language. Mark wasn't just angry. He was desperate, and desperate people do dangerous things. Take your hand off me, I said quietly. Something in my tone must have warned him. He released my arm but didn't step back. Sarah has been brainwashed by you and your feminist nonsense, he continued. She was happy before you started filling her head with ideas about leaving. She was miserable. She was scared. She was starving herself because your family convinced her she didn't deserve to eat. She was learning discipline. She was becoming a better person. I couldn't listen to any more of this. A better person? Mark, you destroyed her self-esteem so completely that she apologized to me for being cold after you left her outside to freeze. You made her believe she deserved abuse. I never hit her, Mark said defensively. There are other ways to hurt people, ways that don't leave visible bruises. Mark seemed to realize he was revealing too much about his character. He tried to change tactics, putting on a fake, remorseful expression. Look, I admit things got out of hand on Christmas Eve. Family dynamics can be complicated, but Sarah belongs with her family. With me, we can work through our problems. What problems? Her inability to get pregnant fast enough? Her tendency to grieve when she loses children? Her failure to be happy while being constantly criticized? Our communication issues, Mark said carefully, are different expectations for marriage. You mean your expectation that she should accept being treated as less than human? Mark's fake concern disappeared. You know what? Fine. Keep her. See how long it takes before you get sick of her constant neediness, too. See how long you can handle her crying over nothing, her inability to function like a normal adult. I've been handling it for 28 years. It's called being a mother. Being a mother is different from being married to someone. You don't have to live with her day after day, deal with her moods, her demands, her failures. The hotel room door opened behind me. Sarah stood there in her pajamas, her hair messy from sleep, her face pale. She'd heard at least part of the conversation. Mark? She said uncertainly. What are you doing here? Mark's expression softened instantly. He put on his most charming smile, the one that had fooled me at their wedding. Hey, babe. I came to bring you home. I've missed you. Sarah looked between us, confusion and fear warring in her eyes. I could see her wavering, pulled back toward the familiar patterns of their relationship despite everything that had happened. I don't know, she said quietly. Maybe we need some time apart to think. Think about what? Mark's voice took on a pleading tone. We're married, Sarah. We made promises to each other. You can't just give up on us because we hit a rough patch. A rough patch? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. Mark, you told me I was broken. You said I couldn't do anything right. I was frustrated. I said things I didn't mean. But that's what couples do. They fight sometimes. It doesn't mean we stop loving each other. I watched Sarah's face as she processed his words. I could see her wanting to believe him, wanting to go back to the fantasy that their marriage could be saved. Your parents hate me, she said. They don't hate you. They're just old-fashioned. They have high standards. But we can work on that together. Sarah started to take a step toward him, and I knew I had to intervene. Sarah, I said gently, remember what you told me yesterday? About feeling like you were disappearing? She stopped, the spell of Mark's charm breaking. Mark shot me a look of pure hatred. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You've turned her against her own family. I didn't turn her against anyone. I just reminded her that she deserves better than being left outside to freeze while her family eats dinner. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, the memory clearly still painful. Mark tried one more approach. Sarah, if you don't come home, everyone will know our marriage failed. Everyone will know you gave up. Is that what you want? To be known as the woman who couldn't make her marriage work? I saw Sarah flinch at his words. Even now, he was using her deepest fears against her. Or, I said, you could be known as the woman who was brave enough to leave when she deserved better. Sarah looked between us one more time, then stepped back into the hotel room and closed the door. Mark pounded on the door 3 more times before giving up. As his footsteps retreated down the hallway, I heard him making a phone call. Dad? It's me. We have a problem. 2 days later, Sarah and I were sitting in the office of Patricia Webb, a family law attorney recommended by my friend Lisa. Patricia was a woman in her 50s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, and kind but sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Sarah had been reluctant to see a lawyer at all. She still harbored hope that somehow she and Mark could work things out, that his family would suddenly develop compassion and understanding. But I knew better. Mark's phone call to his father told me everything I needed to know about what was coming next. Let me make sure I understand the situation correctly, Patricia said, looking over her notes. You want to file for divorce, and you're concerned about potential financial abuse and emotional abuse claims. Sarah nodded nervously, twisting her wedding ring around her finger. I don't want to hurt anyone. I just want to be free. Sarah, Patricia said gently, divorce is rarely about hurting people. It's about protecting yourself and creating a better future. Can you tell me about your financial situation during the marriage? Sarah looked uncomfortable. Mark handled all the money. I didn't work outside the house because he said it would be better for me to focus on getting pregnant and taking care of the home. Did you have access to bank accounts? Credit cards? Mark gave me a household credit card for groceries and things like that. But he checked all the statements. If I spent money on something he didn't approve of, he'd get upset. Patricia made notes. What about your own money from before the marriage? I had some savings, but Mark said it made sense to combine everything. He said married couples should share finances completely. And where did your combined finances go? Sarah hesitated. Mostly into the house. Mark said it was an investment for our future family. His parents helped with the down payment, so he wanted to make sure we paid them back quickly. I'd been quiet through most of this, but I couldn't stay silent anymore. Sarah received a settlement from her father's life insurance when she was 25. It was nearly $50,000. Where did that money go? Sarah looked ashamed. Into the house renovations. Mark said we needed to update everything before having children. His mother had very specific ideas about how the house should look. Patricia wrote this down carefully. Sarah, did you agree to spend your inheritance on renovations, or was this decision made for you? I wanted to contribute to our future, Sarah said quietly. But looking back, I'm not sure I really had a choice. Mark made it seem like I was being selfish if I wanted to keep any money separate. We spent the next hour going through the details of Sarah's marriage. Patricia was thorough but gentle, helping Sarah recognize patterns of control and manipulation without making her feel foolish for not seeing them sooner. What about friends and family relationships? Patricia asked. Did these change during your marriage? Sarah's face fell. I lost touch with most of my friends. Mark said married women should focus on their families, not going out with single friends who might give them bad marriage advice. And your relationship with your mother? Mark thought Mom was too involved in our lives. He said I needed to establish boundaries, be more independent. But then, when I stopped calling as much, he'd complain that I wasn't close enough to family. I felt a surge of anger remembering how Mark had manipulated Sarah into pulling away from me. Every time I called and Mark answered, he'd make comments about Sarah needing space to focus on her marriage. Gradually, Sarah started calling me less, And when she did call, she seemed guarded and stressed. Patricia finished her questioning and leaned back in her chair. Sarah, I want to be honest with you about what we're facing. Your husband and his family clearly have more financial resources than you do right now. They'll likely hire expensive attorneys and try to paint you as unstable or ungrateful. Sarah's face went pale. Maybe this is a mistake. Maybe I should try to work things out with Mark. No, Patricia said firmly. Based on what you've told me, this marriage involves financial abuse, emotional abuse, and isolation tactics. These patterns typically get worse over time, not better. But what if I can't prove any of it? What if the judge doesn't believe me? Patricia smiled reassuringly. That's where we start building our case. We're going to document everything. Medical records showing the physical effects of stress on your body. Financial records showing how your money was controlled and spent without your real consent. We're going to find people who witnessed how you were treated. Over the next week, Patricia's team helped us gather evidence. Sarah's medical records showed the toll her marriage had taken on her health. Beyond the miscarriages, she'd been treated for anxiety, insomnia, and depression. She'd lost 15 pounds in the past year. Her doctor had noted that her stress levels seemed related to her home environment. We also uncovered the financial abuse more clearly. Mark had indeed used Sarah's inheritance for renovations that primarily benefited his parents' vision of how the house should look. Eleanor had insisted on expensive granite countertops, hardwood floors, and designer fixtures. The receipts showed that almost none of the money went toward things Sarah had wanted. Even more damaging was the pattern of financial control. Mark had systematically cut Sarah off from financial independence. When she'd expressed interest in part-time work or volunteering, he'd convinced her that her job was preparing to be a mother. When she'd wanted to take classes or pursue hobbies, he'd said it was a waste of money they needed to save for their future family. Patricia also helped us understand the psychological manipulation. This is called financial abuse, she explained to Sarah. It's a form of domestic abuse where one partner controls the other's access to financial resources. You were isolated financially, so you'd be dependent on Mark and his family. The most heartbreaking evidence came from Sarah's own writings. Patricia had suggested she try to remember and document specific incidents of emotional abuse. Sarah spent hours writing in a notebook, filling page after page with memories she'd suppressed or minimized. She wrote about Mark telling her she was too sensitive every time she cried. About his mother, Elano, R criticized her cooking, her cleaning, her appearance while Mark agreed or stayed silent. About family gatherings where they discussed her fertility problems in front of everyone, offering unwanted advice and making cruel jokes. She wrote about the time she'd had a panic attack during one of Mark's work parties, and instead of comforting her, he'd told people she had social anxiety and needed to learn to handle stress better. She wrote about coming home excited to tell him about a part-time job opportunity, only to have him explain why it would be selfish and irresponsible for her to work outside the home. Reading Sarah's writings broke my heart all over again. But Patricia was right. They were powerful evidence of sustained emotional abuse. The most important thing Patricia told us is that we can show a pattern. This wasn't occasional marital stress. This was systematic control designed to break down Sarah's independence and self-worth. Meanwhile, Mark wasn't sitting idle. True to his father's influence, the Richardson family hired one of Chicago's most expensive law firms. Their strategy became clear quickly. They were going to paint Sarah as mentally unstable, ungrateful, and vindictive. Within a week, I started receiving calls from private investigators asking questions about Sarah's mental health history, her relationship with me, and even her college years. They were digging for anything they could use to discredit her in court. Mark also began a campaign of harassment disguised as reconciliation attempts. He sent flowers to the hotel with cards saying he loved her and wanted to work things out. He called Patricia's office multiple times, asking to speak with Sarah directly. He even showed up at the hotel again, this time with his mother, Eleanor. Sarah's sweetie Eleanor had called through the hotel room door. "This has gone far enough. You're destroying your marriage over a simple misunderstanding. Mark loves you. We all do. Come home and let's talk like adults." Sarah had wanted to answer the door, but I'd convinced her to let me handle it. "Mrs. Richardson," I'd said through the door, "Sarah is not interested in talking right now. Please respect her need for space." "This is ridiculous," Eleanor had snapped, her fake sweetness disappearing. "Sarah is being childish and dramatic. She's throwing away a perfectly good marriage because she can't handle normal family dynamics." "Normal families don't leave each other outside to freeze," I'd replied. "She chose to sit outside. Nobody forced her to pout on the porch." The exchange continued for several minutes, with Eleanor's true nature becoming more apparent as her frustration grew. When she finally left, she made one last threat. "Sarah, if you go through with this divorce, you'll get nothing. Nothing at all. Mark's family has resources you can't imagine. You'll end up with less than you had when you married him." That night, Sarah had cried herself to sleep in my arms. "What if she's right, Mom? What if I'm making a terrible mistake? What if I'm just being too sensitive like they always said?" "Sweetheart," I'd whispered, stroking her hair, "people who really love you don't threaten you when you try to protect yourself. They don't punish you for having feelings or needs." But I could see the doubt in Sarah's eyes. 3 years of psychological manipulation couldn't be undone in a few weeks, no matter how much evidence we gathered. The turning point came when Patricia arranged for Sarah to meet with Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a psychologist who specialized in domestic abuse cases. Dr. Martinez spent 3 hours with Sarah, conducting a thorough evaluation. "Sarah is suffering from complex trauma," Dr. Martinez explained to us afterward. "The symptoms she's experiencing: anxiety, depression, self-doubt, difficulty making decisions, are consistent with prolonged emotional abuse. This isn't mental instability. This is a normal response to abnormal treatment." She also provided something we hadn't expected: validation that Sarah's grief over her miscarriages was not only normal but healthy. Sarah's ability to form emotional attachments to her pregnancies shows psychological health, not instability, Dr. Martinez said. The fact that her husband and his family pathologized her grief is actually evidence of their lack of empathy and understanding. Armed with Dr. Martinez's evaluation, Patricia felt confident we had a strong case. But she also warned us about what was coming. "The Richardsons' legal team is going to fight dirty," she said. "They'll try to make this about Sarah being ungrateful for everything Mark provided. They'll argue that she's mentally unstable and making false accusations. They might even try to claim alienation of affection against you," she said to me. "What does that mean?" "It means they might sue you for supposedly turning Sarah against her husband. It's an outdated legal concept, but some states still allow it." I felt a chill of fear, not for myself but for Sarah. If Mark's family could tie us up in multiple lawsuits, they might wear us down financially and emotionally until Sarah gave up and went back to them. But I'd underestimated my daughter's strength. That evening, as we sat in our hotel room reviewing Patricia's notes, Sarah looked up at me with more determination than I'd seen in years. "Mom," she said quietly, "I don't want to be scared anymore. I don't want to spend the rest of my life apologizing for taking up space. Even if they destroy me in court, at least I'll know I tried to save myself." I felt a surge of pride mixed with heartbreak. This was the Sarah I remembered from childhood: brave, principled, willing to fight for what was right even when it was scary. The legal battle was about to begin in earnest. But for the first time since Christmas Eve, I felt hope that my daughter might actually win. The divorce proceedings began in February, 2 months after that terrible Christmas Eve. Patricia had warned us that Mark's legal team would be aggressive, but nothing could have prepared us for the character assassination they attempted. From the moment we walked into the courthouse, it was clear that this would be a battle of resources as much as justice. Mark arrived with 3 attorneys from Henderson, Black and Associates, Chicago's most prestigious family law firm. They wore expensive suits and carried leather briefcases, projecting an air of authority and success. Sarah squeezed my hand as we took our seats. She'd lost more weight since Christmas and looked fragile in her simple navy dress. I'd tried to convince her to buy something new for court, but she'd insisted she didn't want to waste money we might need for legal fees. The Richardson family filled 2 rows behind Mark's table. Eleanor sat primly in a designer coat, her silver hair perfectly styled. Robert wore his best suit and carried himself like the bank president he'd been for 30 years. Even Jessica was there with her children, creating the image of a large, supportive family. In contrast, Sarah and I sat mostly alone. My sister had driven in from Milwaukee to show support, and Patricia had arranged for Dr. Martinez to be available to testify, but we looked outnumbered and outmatched. Mark's lead attorney, William Henderson himself, was a man in his 60s with silver hair and a voice that commanded attention. When he stood to give his opening statement, he painted a picture of Sarah that I barely recognized. "Your Honor," Henderson began, "this case is about a young woman who received everything she could want from a loving husband and family, but threw it all away when life became challenging. Mrs. Richardson provided Sarah with a beautiful home, financial security, and a supportive extended family. In return, she was expected to fulfill the basic responsibilities of marriage." I felt Sarah shrink beside me as Henderson continued. When Sarah struggled with fertility issues, the Richardson family rallied around her. They provided emotional support, covered medical expenses, and made accommodations for her mental health struggles. But instead of appreciating this support, Sarah became increasingly demanding and unstable. Henderson's version of Christmas Eve was unrecognizable. According to him, Sarah had chosen to sit outside during dinner because she was having one of her episodes and needed space to calm down. The family had given her privacy while continuing with their planned celebration, intending to include her when she felt ready to rejoin them. "Mrs. Larson," Henderson said, nodding toward me, "arrived without invitation and immediately began making accusations based on a situation she didn't understand. Rather than seeking clarification or attempting peaceful resolution, she chose to escalate the conflict and turn a family disagreement into a legal battle." Patricia stood for our opening statement, and I held my breath, hoping she could counter the narrative Henderson had created. "Your Honor," Patricia began, "this case is about a pattern of financial, emotional, and psychological abuse that culminated in a young woman being left outside in freezing weather, while her abusers celebrated inside. Sarah Richardson isn't ungrateful or unstable. She's a victim of systematic abuse who finally found the courage to escape." Patricia methodically laid out our evidence. The financial records show how Sarah's inheritance was spent without her real consent. The medical records documenting the physical effects of prolonged stress. Dr. Martinez's evaluation explains the psychological impact of emotional abuse. "The defense will try to convince you that Sarah's depression and anxiety are signs of mental instability," Patricia said. "But these are normal responses to abnormal treatment. Sarah wasn't failing as a wife. She was being systematically destroyed by people who should have loved and protected her." The first day of testimony was brutal. Henderson called Eleanor Richardson to the stand, and she played the role of concerned mother-in-law perfectly. I tried so hard to help Sarah, Eleanor said, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. She was such a sweet girl when Mark first brought her home. But as the marriage continued, she became increasingly withdrawn and hostile. Henderson led Eleanor through a carefully crafted narrative. Sarah was lazy around the house. She was rude to guests. She refused to participate in family activities. When she couldn't get pregnant, she became obsessed with the idea that everyone was against her. On Christmas Eve, Eleanor continued, Sarah arrived at dinner in a terrible mood. She was snapping at everyone, complaining about the food, and making everyone uncomfortable. Finally, Mark suggested she might need some fresh air to collect herself. She stomped outside and refused to come back in. And when Mrs. Larson arrived, Henderson asked, Sarah immediately started crying and playing victim, making it look like we'd done something terrible to her. She's very good at manipulating situations to make herself look sympathetic. When Patricia cross-examined Eleanor, she did her best to reveal the holes in the story. Mrs. Richardson, you testified that Sarah arrived at dinner in a bad mood. But wasn't she actually helping cook dinner all day? Eleanor hesitated. Well, she was in the kitchen, but she wasn't being pleasant about it. And when you say she was complaining about the food, can you give us a specific example? She just had a negative attitude about everything. That's not an example, Mrs. Richardson. Can you tell us one specific complaint Sarah made about the food? Eleanor's composure slipped slightly. She was just difficult. Anyone could see she was trying to ruin Christmas. By helping to prepare the meal that you all enjoyed? By having a bad attitude while she did it? Patricia pressed harder. Mrs. Richardson, isn't it true that during that dinner you and other family members made comments about Sarah's inability to have children? We were discussing family matters. Specifically, didn't you call her useless because she couldn't get pregnant? Henderson objected, claiming the question was inflammatory. The judge sustained the objection, but the damage was done. Eleanor's perfect composure was cracking. When Mark took the stand, he was equally well prepared. He portrayed himself as a patient, loving husband who'd done everything possible to support his unstable wife. I gave Sarah everything, Mark said, his voice heavy with fake emotion. A beautiful home, financial security, a loving family. All I asked in return was that she try to be happy and fulfilled in our marriage. Mark's testimony about the miscarriages was particularly cruel. He claimed that Sarah's grief was excessive and prolonged, and that she'd refused to seek help or try to move forward. I suggested counseling multiple times. He lied smoothly. But Sarah insisted there was nothing wrong with her, that everyone else was the problem. When Patricia cross-examined Mark, she focused on the financial abuse. Mr. Richardson, when you and Sarah combined your finances, how much money did she contribute to the marriage? I don't remember exact amounts. Patricia handed him a document. According to these bank records, Sarah contributed $47,000 from her father's life insurance settlement. Is that correct? Mark glanced at the paper. If that's what the records show. And how was this money spent? In our home. On our future together. Specifically, it was spent on renovations chosen by your mother, wasn't it? We all discussed the renovations. But your mother made the final decisions about contractors, materials, and design, correct? Mark's jaw tightened. My mother has good taste and experience with home renovation. And did Sarah have input into how her $47,000 inheritance was spent? Of course she did. Patricia pulled out more documents. According to these receipts, the granite countertops your mother chose cost $8,000. The hardwood flooring she selected was $12,000. The designer light fixtures were $3,000. Can you point to one purchase that Sarah specifically requested? Mark fumbled through the papers, clearly flustered. Sarah wanted a nice home, too. That's not what I asked. Can you identify one specific purchase that Sarah requested using her own inheritance money? After a long pause, Mark admitted he couldn't. The testimony continued for 3 days. Jessica took the stand and repeated the family's narrative about Sarah being difficult and ungrateful. Robert testified about Sarah's concerning behavior at family gatherings. But Patricia also presented our witnesses. Dr. Martinez explained Sarah's psychological state and how it was consistent with abuse rather than mental illness. Sarah's former college roommate testified that Sarah had been a happy, confident person before her marriage. I testified about the changes I'd observed in my daughter over the 3 years of her marriage. The most powerful moment came when Sarah herself took the stand. She was terrified, her hands shaking as she swore to tell the truth. But when Patricia asked her to describe Christmas Eve, Sarah found her voice. "I had been cooking all day," she said quietly. "I made the turkey, the stuffing, the vegetables, everything Mark's family likes. I was tired and sad because it was our third Christmas without a baby, but I was trying to make the dinner nice for everyone." Sarah's voice grew stronger as she continued. "During dinner, they started talking about me like I wasn't there, about how I was useless because I couldn't have children, about how I was a burden on the family. Mark joined in, saying I was faking depression to get attention." "What happened next?" Patricia asked gently. "I started crying, and Mark got angry. He said I was ruining Christmas with my drama. He told me to go outside until I could act normally. When I said it was freezing outside, he said maybe the cold would shock some sense into me." Sarah looked directly at Mark as she delivered the most damning testimony. "I sat outside for 2 hours. I could hear them laughing inside, talking about what a failure I was. I thought about walking away, but I had nowhere to go and no money of my own. I thought about how this was my life now, being punished for being sad, being told I deserved it because I couldn't give them grandchildren." By the end of Sarah's testimony, there were tears in the eyes of several people in the courtroom gallery. Even the court reporter looked moved by her quiet dignity and obvious pain. Henderson tried to attack Sarah on cross-examination, suggesting she was being dramatic and manipulative. But Sarah had found her strength, and she answered his questions clearly and honestly. "Mr. Henderson," she said at one point, "I spent 3 years apologizing for taking up space in my own home. I'm not going to apologize anymore for wanting to be treated with basic human decency." The closing arguments were passionate on both sides. Henderson painted Sarah as an unstable woman who couldn't handle the normal stresses of marriage and was now trying to punish the family who'd supported her. Patricia focused on the evidence of systematic abuse and control. "Sarah Richardson isn't asking for revenge," she concluded. "She's asking for freedom. Freedom from a family that treated her grief as a character flaw, her sadness as a crime, and her very existence as a burden. She's asking this court to recognize that no amount of money or social standing gives anyone the right to destroy another person's soul." After 4 days of testimony, Judge Catherine Morrison announced she would render her decision the following week. As we left the courthouse, I felt cautiously optimistic. We'd presented a strong case, and Sarah had been brave and compelling on the stand. But Mark's family wasn't done fighting. That evening, Eleanor Richardson gave an interview to a local news station, painting Sarah as a mentally ill woman who was trying to destroy a good family with false accusations. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since Christmas Eve, I believed we might actually win,